Hello friends, welcome to African Urban Tales, where stories come alive. Do well to hit that subscription button and turn on notifications bell. Now, relax as we dive into today's story.
The city skyline was unlike anything Elijah had ever seen before. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky, their windows glistening under the afternoon sun. The streets bustled with cars, and people moved with a sense of urgency he had never experienced back in the village. His heart pounded with excitement and nervousness as he clutched the small, worn-out bag that contained all his belongings. Standing beside him was his elder brother, Charles Mitchell, a man who had carved his way into success through sheer determination and hard work. Charles was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, always dressed in sharp suits that made him look like he belonged among the city elites. He had left the village over a decade ago, and now he was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city. Elijah, on the other hand, was 25, thin, and had a simple, unrefined appearance. Though he was ambitious, he had never been exposed to the opportunities that Charles had. "Welcome to your new home, little brother," Charles said, clapping Elijah on the back as they entered a luxurious apartment complex. Elijah's mouth fell open as he took in the surroundings. The marble floors shined under the ceiling lights, and the furniture looked like something from a magazine. The air smelled of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. "Is this where you live?" Elijah asked in disbelief. Charles chuckled. "Yes, it is. And from now on, this is your home too." Just then, a woman's voice interrupted them. "You must be Elijah." Elijah turned to see Amelia Mitchell, Charles's wife. She was beautiful, too beautiful. Her deep brown eyes sparkled with curiosity, and her full lips curled into a smile. She was wearing a silk dress that clung to her curves in a way that made Elijah look away quickly, embarrassed. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said, bowing slightly out of habit. Amelia giggled. "Oh, there's no need for that. Just call me Amelia." She looked at Charles. "Why didn't you tell me your brother was so handsome?" Charles laughed, shaking his head. "Don't flatter him too much, or he'll get a big head." Elijah felt his face grow warm. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from a woman like Amelia. "Come," Charles said, leading Elijah into the house. "Let me show you your room." That night, after settling into his new room, Elijah sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. He could hear Charles and Amelia talking in their bedroom, their voices muffled by the walls. He was grateful to his brother. Charles had promised to teach him how to do business, get him an education, and help him become independent. Back in the village, opportunities were scarce, and life was slow. But here in the city, everything was different. The next morning, Charles took Elijah to one of his business places, a high-end electronics store. "You're going to start by learning," Charles explained. "You'll watch how things work here, and once you're comfortable, I'll put you in charge of a small section." Elijah nodded eagerly. "I'll work hard, brother. I promise." Charles smiled and patted his shoulder. "I know you will. That's why I brought you here." For the first few weeks, Elijah was like a sponge, absorbing everything he could about business. He learned how to interact with customers, how to manage money, and how to negotiate deals. Charles was a strict but patient mentor, and Elijah admired him deeply. But admiration was not the only thing growing inside him. Every evening, when he returned home, Amelia was there. At first, their interactions were brief, simple greetings, casual questions about his day. But as time passed, Amelia began to take a deeper interest in him. One evening, while Charles was away on a business trip, Elijah was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when Amelia walked in wearing a satin nightgown. "You're adjusting well to city life," she said, leaning against the counter. Elijah nodded, trying to keep his eyes on the floor. "Yes, Charles is teaching me a lot." Amelia smiled. "You know, Charles is always busy, always working. Sometimes, I feel like I'm just here to decorate the house." Elijah swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. She stepped closer. "It's nice having someone around to talk to." Elijah cleared his throat. "I should get to bed." She chuckled softly. "Of course. Good night, Elijah." As he walked away, his heart pounded in his chest. The next few weeks, Amelia became more daring. Whenever Charles was at work, she found excuses to be around Elijah. She asked him to help her with things lifting boxes, fixing small things around the house, or just keeping her company while she watched movies. One evening, she sat beside him on the couch and sighed. "You know, you remind me of Charles when he was younger," she said, looking at him with soft eyes. Elijah's stomach twisted. "Ow!" She traced her finger along the couch. "The way you're so eager to learn. So ambitious. But Charles, he's changed. He's always too busy. Too tired." Elijah could feel the tension in the air. Something dangerous was brewing. But he convinced himself that nothing would happen. After all, Charles was his brother, and Amelia was his wife. But deep down, he knew he was lying to himself. The night was warm, and the air carried the soft hum of the city beyond the apartment walls. Charles had left on a business trip earlier that day, and the house felt quieter than usual. Elijah sat on the living room couch, flipping through the channels on the large television, but he wasn't really watching. Amelia entered the room, wearing a silky robe that barely covered her thighs. She held a glass of wine in her hand, her fingers delicately tracing the rim. "You're not sleeping?" she asked, taking a seat next to him. Elijah shook his head. "Not tired." She took a sip of her wine, then sighed dramatically. "This house feels so empty when Charles is gone." Elijah swallowed hard, his hands tightening on the remote. He could smell her perfume, intoxicating and sweet. "He'll be back soon," he muttered, trying to focus on the screen. Amelia leaned in slightly, resting her elbow on the couch. "I know, but that's the problem, isn't it?" Elijah turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head, her eyes studying him. "Charles is always leaving, always working. Sometimes I wonder if he even notices me anymore." Elijah's breath hitched. This conversation was dangerous. He should have changed the subject, walked away. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "Of course he notices you. He loves you." Amelia chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Love." She took another sip of her wine. "Love isn't just about providing, Elijah. It's about presence. It's about passion." Elijah felt his pulse quicken. "You should talk to him about it." "I have," she sighed, placing her glass on the table. But nothing changes. A tense silence settled between them. Then, slowly, she reached out, brushing her fingers against his arm. "You understand me, don't you?" she whispered. Elijah stiffened. He should have moved away. He should have said something. But he didn't. Instead, when Amelia leaned in, he didn't stop her. When her lips met his, he didn't pull away. And when her robe slid from her shoulders, he let it fall to the floor. That night, the line between loyalty and betrayal was shattered. It started as a mistake, a single moment of weakness. But it didn't stop there. The next day and the next and the next, Elijah and Amelia found themselves drawn together like moths to a flame. Whenever Charles was at work, they stole moments. Secret touches, hungry kisses, forbidden nights. One afternoon, as Amelia lay in bed beside Elijah, she traced a finger down his chest. "I don't feel guilty," she admitted. Elijah turned his head to look at her. "You don't." She shook her head, a lazy smile on her lips. "I should, but I don't. Maybe because I've never felt more alive." Elijah knew he should feel guilty, but he didn't. Not anymore. He was no longer the shy village boy who had arrived months ago. He had changed. Amelia noticed it too. "You're different," she whispered one evening as she buttoned his shirt after another night of passion. Elijah smirked. "Ow!" She ran a hand through his hair. "More confident, more sure of yourself." She wasn't wrong. Elijah had started dressing better. He carried himself differently. At work, he spoke with more authority. He no longer hesitated to make decisions. He started acting like he belonged. Amelia was no longer cautious. She no longer bothered hiding her favoritism for Elijah. She praised him openly, compared him to Charles when her husband was around. One evening, as they all sat at the dinner table, Amelia sighed dramatically. "Elijah, you should be proud of yourself," she said, running a hand down his arm. "You've learned so much in such a short time." Charles smiled, oblivious to the undertone in her voice. "That's true. He's doing well." Amelia smirked. "You know, Charles, I don't understand why you never teach me about business the way you teach Elijah." Charles chuckled. "Because you never asked." Amelia rolled her eyes. Or maybe because you think I wouldn't understand." Charles shook his head, amused. But Elijah saw the way Amelia's fingers lingered on her wine glass, the way she stole glances at him from across the table. She was getting reckless. With time, Elijah grew bolder. He stopped pretending to be innocent. He started dressing in Charles's expensive suits. He walked around the house with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. One afternoon, while Charles was at work, Elijah sat in the living room with his feet up on the table, scrolling through his phone. Amelia was beside him, her legs draped over his lap. "I wish I could stop pretending," she murmured. Elijah smirked. "Pretending what?" "That I don't want to be with you openly." She sighed, stretching. "What if Charles finds out?" Elijah shrugged. "What can he do? He loves you too much to leave." Amelia grinned. "You're becoming dangerous." And she loved it. She started texting him secretly, even when Charles was in the same room. She started sneaking into his room at night, tiptoeing through the house like a shadow. It was thrilling, addictive, a dangerous game. And then everything changed. Months passed. Then one morning, Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at a pregnancy test in her trembling hands. Positive. Her breath came in short gasps. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Elijah," she whispered, her voice shaking. Elijah, who had just walked in, frowned. "What's wrong?" She turned the test toward him. His face went pale. "You're pregnant?" he whispered. She nodded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of reality crashed down on them. "This," Elijah ran a hand through his hair. "This baby, it could be mine." Amelia nodded slowly. "Or it could be Charles's." Elijah swallowed hard. A chance. There was a chance the child wasn't his. But what if it was? Amelia stood up, wrapping her arms around him. "No one has to know," she whispered against his ear. "Charles will think it's his." Elijah's mind raced. Could they really get away with this? They had fooled Charles for months. Could they fool him forever? Amelia kissed his lips softly. "We have nothing to worry about." Elijah forced himself to believe her. But deep down, he knew a storm was coming. Over the next few weeks, Amelia acted like everything was normal. She smiled, laughed, and carried herself like the devoted wife. But Elijah noticed the small changes. Charles was more attentive. He touched Amelia's stomach with wonder. "I can't believe we're having another child," he said one evening, his voice filled with pride. Elijah clenched his jaw. Guilt twisted in his gut. At work, Charles began treating Elijah even better, trusting him with bigger responsibilities. "I see a lot of myself in you," Charles told him one afternoon. "You remind me of when I first started. I'm proud of you, Elijah." Proud. Elijah's stomach churned. If only Charles knew the truth. And soon he would. The years passed, and Charles and Amelia's second child, Nathan, grew into a lively boy with curly brown hair and bright eyes. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect family. Charles had continued to expand his business. Elijah had grown into a confident and successful man under his brother's mentorship, and Amelia played her role as the loving wife and mother. But secrets never stay buried forever. One fateful evening, 5-year-old Nathan collapsed in the living room. Amelia let out a piercing scream as she rushed to his side. "Charles, something is wrong with Nathan," she cried. Charles sprinted down the stairs, his heart pounding. He scooped his son into his arms. Nathan's skin was pale, his breathing shallow. "We need to get him to the hospital. Now," Charles ordered. Elijah, who had just arrived home, stood frozen as he watched the scene unfold. His throat tightened as a sense of dread filled him. At the hospital, doctors ran several tests. After hours of waiting, the doctor returned with a grim expression. "We've diagnosed Nathan with a rare blood disorder," he explained. "He needs an immediate blood transfusion." Charles straightened. "I'll do it. Take as much as you need." The doctor nodded. "We'll run a quick test to confirm your compatibility." Charles gave a reassuring squeeze to Amelia's trembling hands. "He's our son. Of course I'll be a match." But fate had other plans. An hour later, the doctor returned with a puzzled expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell, but you're not a match." Charles frowned. "That can't be right. Check again." "We did," the doctor said firmly. The room fell into absolute silence. Charles turned to Amelia, his face unreadable. "What is he saying, Amelia?" Emilia's hands shook. I don't know. There must be a mistake. The doctor cleared his throat. We'll need to test other family members. A sibling or close relative might be a match. Charles turned sharply toward Elijah. Elijah, get tested. Elijah's body stiffened. His palms turned clammy. Why me? His voice came out hoarse. Because you're his uncle. Charles snapped. If I'm not a match, maybe you are. Elijah swallowed hard. Oh, okay. The blood test was taken, and the results came back faster than Elijah had hoped. The doctor walked in, his expression unreadable. Mr. Elijah Mitchell, you're a perfect match for Nathan. The world stopped. Elijah felt his knees go weak. Charles, however, stood frozen, his face drained of color. What did you just say? Charles's voice was dangerously quiet. Elijah opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Emilia let out a sharp breath, gripping the edge of the hospital bed. The doctor, oblivious to the rising storm, continued, It makes sense. Since you're a close relative. Charles took a slow step toward Elijah. His fists clenched. His jaw tightened. Elijah, he whispered, tell me the truth. Is Nathan your son? Elijah's heart pounded. His throat felt like it was closing. Aye. Tell me the truth. Charles roared, his voice shaking the room. Emilia burst into tears. Charles, please. But her plea only confirmed it. Charles's breathing became ragged. He looked at his wife, who had just betrayed him in the worst possible way. Then he looked at Elijah, the brother he had pulled out of poverty, given a home, and trusted. His vision blurred with rage. Charles stormed out of the hospital, his entire world shattered into pieces. His wife, his brother, his son. He felt like a fool. How long had they been laughing behind his back? How long had he been raising another man's child without knowing? He needed answers. That night, Charles sat in his office, gripping a glass of whiskey. His mind raced with thoughts, memories, signs he had been too blind to see before. Emilia had always been too fond of Elijah. The way she looked at him, the way she defended him, the way she always found ways to praise him. And Elijah, how could he do this? He needed proof. Cold, hard proof. Charles had reached his limit. The betrayal had festered in his heart like poison, and now it was time to unleash his wrath. The house was eerily quiet when he entered. Too quiet. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor as he made his way toward the living room. Then he heard a soft giggle. It came from the hallway leading to the guest rooms. Charles's blood boiled. He moved swiftly, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the door, he could hear hushed whispers. Then, without warning, he kicked the door open. The sight before him made his vision blur with rage. Emilia, Elijah, together. Emilia let out a scream, scrambling to cover herself with the sheets. Elijah, caught off guard, sat up, eyes wide with terror. Charles, Emilia gasped. But Charles wasn't listening. Rage took over. With one swift motion, he grabbed Elijah by the throat and slammed him against the wall. You bastard! Charles roared, his fist colliding with Elijah's jaw. Elijah grunted in pain, struggling to push Charles away. Charles, wait. But Charles didn't wait. He punched him again, and again. Emilia screamed, Stop! Stop it! As she tried to pull Charles away, but he shoved her off so hard she stumbled backward, crashing onto the floor. You slept with my wife? Charles growled, gripping Elijah by the collar. You fathered a child under my roof. Elijah, his lip bleeding, finally snapped. His eyes darkened with something ugly as he wiped his mouth. And so what if I did? He spat, breathing heavily. Charles froze. Elijah pushed himself up, standing tall despite his bruised face. The fear was gone now, replaced by pure resentment. You think you're better than me? Elijah hissed. You've always had everything. The money, the power, the respect, even the woman I wanted. Charles clenched his fists. What the hell are you talking about? Elijah let out a bitter laugh. Do you know what it felt like growing up in your shadow? You left the village, became rich, and when you finally remembered me, you brought me here like some kind of charity case. You controlled my life, treated me like your little project. Charles glared at him, his heart pounding. I gave you everything, he said through gritted teeth. I pulled you out of nothing, and this is how you repay me. Elijah smirked, a twisted, mocking smirk. I took your wife, he said coldly, and she loved every second of it. Crack. Charles's fist collided with Elijah's face once more. Elijah crashed into the nightstand, knocking over a lamp. Amelia screamed again, crawling toward Charles. Tears streamed down her face. Charles, please, she sobbed, grabbing his leg. It was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you. Charles looked down at her, the woman he once loved. Now, she was nothing to him. He yanked his leg free and stepped away, his breathing ragged. You disgust me, he spat. Both of you. Charles took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Violence wasn't enough. They had taken everything from him. Now, he would take everything from them. Elijah, he said coldly. Elijah groaned, tried to push himself up. What? Charles straightened his suit and adjusted his cufflinks, regaining his composure. You think I stole your chances? He asked, his voice deadly calm. Fine. Let's see how you do without me. Elijah frowned. What do you mean? Charles smirked. It was a cruel, merciless smirk. You're fired. Elijah blinked. What? You're fired, Charles repeated. From my company. From my life. Elijah's stomach dropped. Charles, wait. I'm not finished, Charles said, his voice icy cold. He pulled out his phone and made a single call. Mr. Lewis, he said, speaking to his personal assistant. I want Elijah Mitchell's name blacklisted in every major business in the city. Effective immediately. Elijah's face drained of color. No, you can't do that, he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Charles arched an eyebrow. Can I? I have nothing without this job. Elijah yelled, stepping forward. Charles's eyes darkened. Exactly. Elijah stumbled back. Amelia clutched at Charles's arm. Please, you can't do this to him. Charles yanked his arm away, glaring at her. And you, he said coldly, get out of my house. Amelia gasped. What? You heard me, Charles said, his voice firm. You have 10 minutes to pack whatever you can. After that, I never want to see your face again. Amelia fell to her knees, sobbing. Where will I go? I don't care. Elijah shook his head, his world crumbling before his eyes. Charles, please. We're still brothers. Charles laughed, a cruel, bitter laugh. You were my brother, he said. Now, you're nothing. Elijah's legs felt weak. His entire body trembled. He had played the game, and he had lost. By morning, Amelia was gone. Homeless. Alone. She had traded love for lust, security for secrets, and now she had nothing. Elijah, once the confident young man who had stolen from his own brother, was now a broken shadow of himself. Charles had made sure of it, but one final question remained. Nathan. Charles stood by the window, watching the sun rise, his hands tucked into his pockets. His lawyer stood beside him. Sir, about the boy. Will you still raise him? Charles was silent for a long moment. Then, finally he spoke. He is not my son, he said flatly, but he is innocent. He'll be cared for, educated, given everything he needs. The lawyer nodded. And Amelia? Charles smirked. She made her choice. A final sigh left his lips. The weight of betrayal still clung to his heart, but now he had won. He turned away from the window. It's over. And with that, Charles Mitchell walked away, never looking back. Elijah had always believed he was destined for greatness. But now he was nothing. With Charles's influence, no one in the city would hire him. The doors that had once been wide open were now slammed shut in his face. His once proud stance had turned into a hunched shuffle. He had nowhere to go. After exhausting all his options, he did the unthinkable. He returned to the village. As he walked down the familiar dusty roads, heads turned. Women whispered. Old men shook their heads in disappointment. One man muttered, Look at him. He had everything and still threw it away. A woman scoffed, disgraceful. How could he betray his own brother? Elijah kept his head down. He arrived at his family home, where his uncle, old man Gregory, still lived. Elijah knocked. The door creaked open, revealing Gregory's wrinkled face. The old man's eyes narrowed. Elijah swallowed hard. Uncle, why are you here? Gregory's voice was cold. Elijah looked down. I have nowhere else to go. Gregory snorted. And whose fault is that? Elijah flinched. I know I made mistakes. But please, Uncle, just let me stay for a while. Just until I figure things out. Gregory sighed deeply. You had a golden opportunity, Elijah. You could have been a great man. Instead, you let greed and lust destroy you. Elijah clenched his fists. I know I messed up, but I have nothing left. Gregory studied him for a long moment, then finally stepped aside. You can sleep in the storage hut, he muttered. Elijah's heart sank. The storage hut. Once, he had lived in a mansion. Now, he was being offered a room meant for farming tools. But he had no choice. As he lay on the cold floor that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, regret burned his chest. He had lost everything, and there was no going back. Unlike Elijah, Amelia refused to give up. She was determined. She would get Charles back. One evening, she stood outside his office, waiting for him. When Charles finally stepped out, she ran up to him. Charles, please, I need to talk to you. Charles stopped in his tracks. His expression was unreadable. What do you want, Amelia? Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Charles remained silent. I was lonely, she continued. You were always busy. I was weak, but I never stopped loving you. Please, give me another chance. Charles exhaled sharply. Another chance? He let out a bitter chuckle. You betrayed me. You carried another man's child and let me believe he was mine. Do you really think I could ever trust you again? Amelia sobbed. Charles, I don't want to live without you. He shook his head. You made your choice, Amelia, and I've made mine. He stepped aside, walking past her without looking back. That night, Amelia sat alone in a tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she had lost everything. She had chosen desire over loyalty, and now she was just another forgotten woman. Charles refused to let his past define him. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also taught him lessons. He devoted himself to his business, but more importantly, to his son, Jason. One evening, as Charles sat in his study, Jason walked in. Dad, the boy asked softly. Charles looked up and smiled. Yes, son. Jason hesitated. Are you happy? Charles was taken aback. Why do you ask? Jason shuffled his feet. You worked so hard, and I know what happened with Mom. I just want to know if you'll ever be happy again. Charles's heart clenched. He reached out and pulled his son into a hug. I am happy, Jason, because I have you. Jason smiled. Will you ever fall in love again? Charles chuckled. Maybe, and he did. 2 years later, he met Olivia, a kind, intelligent woman who treated him with respect and loyalty. Unlike Amelia, Olivia valued him not for his money, but for the man he was. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Olivia turned to him. Charles. Yes. She smiled. I love you. For the first time in years, Charles felt peace. He looked at her, and for the first time since his heartbreak, he felt whole again. I love you too. And just like that, Charles Mitchell moved on. Years later, in the village, Elijah sat outside the old storage hut. A boy ran past, laughing. Elijah sighed. Once he had dreamed of wealth. Once he had everything. Now, he was just another forgotten man. And Amelia? She still struggled to make ends meet, raising Nathan alone. As she sat by the window of her tiny apartment, she whispered the same words to herself every night. I should have chosen differently. But Charles? Charles had won. And this time, he would never let betrayal touch his life again. The end.